Hello, this is Sarah Braasch. Welcome back to my channel. So I want to talk about how the California and New Jersey state legislatures recently promulgated the most disgusting and grossly unconstitutional hate crime legislation. So I was grossly defamed in The Hill recently. The Hill was reporting on these grossly unconstitutional statutes that were recently promulgated by the California and New Jersey state legislatures and signed into law by their respective governors. And I just want to make clear that these people are idiots. They have no business being state legislators. They have no business being governors. And of course, they're Democrats. It is the Democrats doing this. The Democrats are the ones who are dismantling civil rights legislation. The Democrats are the ones who are trying to criminalize as hate crimes unwoke thoughts and speech, which is grossly unconstitutional thought and speech crime. It is the Democrats who are trying to bring back Jim Crow and reestablish racial segregation in the public space. It is the Democrats who are trying to destroy the due process and equal protection clauses of the U.S. Constitution. And we have proof of this. I am proof of this. I am proof of this, okay? And the fact that The Hill grossly defamed me as someone who tries to lynch black students at Yale in their piece about these grossly unconstitutional pieces of legislation in California and New Jersey is proof, okay, of what's going on. The Democrats are the greater threat to our democratic institutions. So what they have done is they promulgated grossly unconstitutional hate crime legislation that criminalizes allegedly racist motives for calling 911. Criminalizes allegedly racist motives for calling 911. Okay? So now there's so much to discuss, and I don't want this video to be too long. I am engaged in a letter wiki convo with Skeptic Review 89 with Gretchen Mullen on letter wiki that is all about this, and we're going to go through all of it beat by beat from beginning to end. So I don't want this particular video to be too long, but I'm just going to get the conversation started, and I will be making many more videos on this subject. But I just want to reiterate that these Democratic state legislators and governors are idiots. They don't care about the U.S. Constitution. They don't care about violating the U.S. Constitution. They don't care. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous what's happening. So where should I start? I just want to get started. So now the problem, here's something that I do want to explain, is that there's a difference between this new crop of truly brazen unconstitutional hate crime legislation, like the CAREN Act, which was a San Francisco municipal statute, but still. But there's something really brazen and disgusting and vile about this new crop of hate crime legislation, which is different from traditional hate crime legislation. And that's what I'm going to explain. I'm going to explain that in this video, and then I'll save further discussion for other videos. But the differences in traditional hate crime legislation, they at least make an attempt to pretend that they're abiding by the U.S. Constitution. They at least attempt to, the legislators that promulgated traditional hate crime legislation, at least attempt to obscure the fact that they are grossly violating the U.S. Constitution. They are still grossly violating the U.S. Constitution, but at least they're making an attempt to at least try to obscure the fact that they're grossly violating the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so what is it that's such a violation? Okay, there's a number of reasons why traditional hate crime legislation is a violation of the U.S. Constitution, but I want to focus on the criminalization of motive. So the reason why the criminalization of motive is such a violation of the U.S. Constitution, in particular the First Amendment, is because the criminalization of motive is thought and speech crime. Okay? The motive is the why. I'll do a different video on the difference between motive and mental intent, because mental intent is an element of the crime, but motive is not an element of the crime. So when you make motive the why you did something, the why you murdered someone, maybe you did murder a black person because you hate black people, okay? Maybe you did that, or someone did that. So that's the why you murdered a black person. That's the why you perpetrated a murder, because you hate black people, okay? That's your motive. That's what's motivating you to perpetrate this crime. That's fine. You know what? That cannot be an element of the crime. That cannot be an element of the crime. As soon as you criminalize the motive, you are violating the U.S. Constitution. You are creating a hate crime that is a crime, a thought and speech crime, and you are violating the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, because how can I possibly know what is motivating you to perpetrate a given crime? How can I possibly know what is motivating you to perpetrate a given crime? I can't. The only way I can know that is if I can read your mind, which I can't, or if you tell me that you hate black people, or you wrote on you're like Lolata Siambola and you have a whole website devoted to racial hatred and bigotry. You know, this is why it's thought and speech crime. This is why every time someone gets accused of having perpetrated a hate crime, they point to the person's social media tweets and statements and a website that they maintained. This is why it's thought and speech crime. So now in traditional hate crime legislation, the legislators at least made an attempt to obscure the fact that they were grossly violating the U.S. Constitution. How did they do this? Well, what they would do is they would just have the hate crime be more stringent sentencing, basically. So the hate crime part of it came in at the sentencing portion. So you weren't actually being put on trial for the hate crime. Now, I'll do another video about how this brings up a whole slew of issues in terms of violations of your fair trial protections in the U.S. Constitution. But this is how, in traditional hate crime legislation, they try to get to avoid having to admit that they are making the motive an element of the crime. Okay? Now, in this new crop of hate crime legislation, this recent crop of hate crime legislation, and it's not just California, New Jersey, it's also been promulgated in New York, Oregon, and Michigan. I'm not sure if New York has been finalized yet, but I believe Oregon and Michigan both have finalized hate crime legislation that is part and parcel of this new crop of really brazen hate crime legislation that is different from traditional hate crime legislation. How is it different? Because there is not even a pretense of trying to abide by the U.S. Constitution, of trying to obscure the fact that the U.S. Constitution is being grossly violated. They are not even pretending that they care. This new crop of truly brazen hate crime legislation that criminalizes allegedly racist motives, that makes allegedly racist motives an element of the crime, there is not even an attempt to pretend, to obscure the fact, to dissemble, to hide the fact that they are just not even ignoring the U.S. Constitution. They're just blatantly and egregiously violating the U.S. Constitution without a care in the world. They don't care. Everyone knows what they're doing. They couldn't care less. They think that in this current political climate, they can get away with just brazenly violating the U.S. Constitution. And the reason why this new crop of hate crime legislation like the CAREN Act does this is because they are just out and out making the allegedly racist motive an element of the crime. They are criminalizing the allegedly racist motive. This is straight up, no holds barred. No one is trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. They are just violating the U.S. Constitution, violating the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, creating straight up thought and speech crime. Okay? And what the Democrats have, and so now the Democrats are criminalizing unwoke thoughts and speech. We know that this law is never going to be applied in a situation like mine, where in point of fact, it was actually Lalata Siambola and Jean-Louis Renison at Yale who made false reports to the Yale campus police based on racial hatred of white people. And it is true, Lalata Siambola has a whole website dedicated to her racial hatred and bigotry, anti-Semitic and anti-white bigotry. She is a proponent of Nick Cannon's original DNA and melanin conspiracy theories. Okay, so we know that this law will never be applied in a situation like that. So that's why it is also an equal protection violation, and it is also a due process violation, because we know that it's based on woke intersectional feminism and critical race theory. And the foundational premise is that if a black person or another person of color accuses a white person of racism, then this is a condemnation of racism. And there's not only no due process required, in point of fact, if the white person attempts to make a demand for due process, that is just not only just evidence of their racism, it is further racism. It is further racism. So I think I'll stop there in this video, but I just wanted to explain in this video the difference between traditional hate crime legislation, which is also unconstitutional, completely unconstitutional, but they at least pretend like they're not violating the U.S. Constitution, and this new crop of really brazen hate crime legislation being promulgated by the really stupid Democrats, that where they don't even pretend like they care about the U.S. Constitution. Let me say that again. The Democrats aren't even pretending anymore like they care about the U.S. Constitution. Okay, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. I'll have my PayPal me and GoFundMe links below. So please support me and please donate to my legal fund so that I can sue Yale and the fake news press and the moral outrage industry, and so that we can stop the Democrats from destroying our democratic institutions. Okay, thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.